You learn a lot about a lady, you learn a lot about a dude by how they invest their resources. That tells a story. Some people, of course, are very unprincipled investors, or they outsource their investing. I don't know enough about investing to be any good at it. I have a little tiny 401k thing that I got one time at a job, and I think there's still some money in there. And I don't think it does particularly well. I should probably look at that at some point because I'm going to get old, and then I'm going to probably want that to have worked out. But I don't know. It's intimidating, and I'm not very good at it. But even my act of outsourcing my investing tells you something about me. It tells you a little bit about where my priorities are and where my skill sets are and maybe where my insecurities lie. But you go and look at somebody like Elon Musk, who today tried to buy Twitter, like just buy the internet for all intents and purposes. And you can read between the lines. You can learn something about that guy. One, you learn a whole lot about his resources. He's got a ton because he bid $10 a share over the actual value. He overbid 20% to buy Twitter. That's a very, very generous offer, I think. I haven't looked yet, but I'm assuming that the Twitter board either has or is going to turn him down on that. But dang, why does Elon Musk want to buy Twitter? Well, I think I know. I think it's because his particular set of values is such that he thinks Twitter should be a more unregulated place and a little bit more Wild Westy in terms of ideas. Some of you might like that. Some of you might not like that. That's not really the point here. The point is, you kind of get a sense of who Elon Musk is by how he uses his resources, by what kind of cars he likes to try to build, by the fact that he took one of those cars and launched it into a space with a guy sitting in the driver's seat. And whether you like a guy like that or don't like a guy like that, still, you can figure things out about his character, what he's into, and what he's up to by looking at those investments. Likewise, we got all these parables in the book of Matthew where Jesus, in one way or another, likens God to this master. Usually the master is away for whatever reason. There's always servants involved in these illustrations, and sometimes the servants are overly zealous and eager to help, and they're clumsy and they don't know what they're doing, like in Matthew 13, the parable of the wheat and the tares. Sometimes the servants are very noble and attentive, as is the case at the parable at the end of Matthew 24, where you got the good servant who's attentive and doing what they ought to do. But then sometimes the servants are great big dumb giant idiots who are low character, and they are not vested in the master's project, as is the case with the goofus servant at the end of Matthew chapter 24, or the servant who buries the coin in the parable of the talents that we've been looking at here for the last few days. In all of these situations, you got this master character, and we learn little things, little hints about who he is and what he's up to and what he's into based on how he does business and how he invests his resources and what he expects from those who he invites into helping to invest his resources. So what do we learn about the character of the master from the parable of the talents? Well, I think we've learned a lot already. One of the things that we've learned is an extension of the Lord's Prayer that we got all the way back in the beginning of Matthew in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus' big description of the whole kingdom manifesto thing. Remember in that prayer that probably whether you're a Christian or not, you've heard a jillion times, there's all that business about give us this day our daily bread. Well, the idea there is that this is an oath of submission. The Lord's Prayer is from a servant, an individual, assuming the posture of subservience before the master, the king, and saying, you get my loyalty and my fate is in your hands, but I trust your benevolence, and you ultimately own all of the provisions that are needed around here, so you're the one who provides my daily bread. I'm going to depend on you for that provision. And throughout the book of Matthew, we see this repeated theme that the provision of this king in the true, real kingdom is unlimited. This king is abundantly generous, and stuff ain't an issue. Well, why? Well, because the Bible holds out this king as being the initiator of existence as we understand existence, but also predating existence as we understand it, and also being existence in his essence, and that his very name is I am, being, existence, essence. We're talking about the deity when we talk about the God of the Bible. We're talking about no limits, no boundaries, absolute ability to call existence out of non-existence, matter out of non-matter. Provision is going to be no problem for this king. And so when we get this jaw-dropping number of how much this king has vested, or this master has vested in these three different servants, if you've been paying attention through the rest of the book of Matthew, that's not really a surprise. Stuff ain't an issue for this master. Stuff ain't an issue for this king. So with this master, with this king, provision is limitless. And these provisions, these riches, are something that people who have no business being an heir or a claimant to these riches, they're made into heirs and claimants. The theme throughout the book of Matthew is that you're not just a part of this kingdom barely let in by the hair of your chinny chin chin if you are sad and subservient and lowly enough. No, you're given a place of honor if you're a part of this kingdom. You go from being outsiders and enemies of this kingdom to being sons and daughters dressed in royal robes, participating in the noble actions of this kingdom and bearing responsibility and having stuff that you do to make this kingdom go. It's an amazing reversal of fortune that we're talking about here that Jesus is describing that happens when you go from outside the kingdom to inside the kingdom. And that reversal of fortune is demonstrated in a language that particularly the first century audience would have understood, which is, no, I'm not just saying that you're in my household. I'm not just saying that you can play a role here. Like, I'm vesting you with my riches and my wealth and my inheritance. Here, take the provisions of the master. Take the joy of the master. You have ownership here. You have participation, though everything ultimately belongs to the king and flows from the king. He is infinitely generous with these infinite resources and provisions, and he demonstrates your made rightness, your made a son or daughterness in this kingdom by giving you access to this stuff and giving you a job to do. That tells us something about how this master, how this king is. But here's what's interesting. The master and the king in this motif, as it plays out throughout the book of Matthew and the teachings of Jesus, on the one hand, you got unlimited provision and just unbelievable generosity and willingness to even lose on deals. Like, here, I'll just forgive all your debt. Person who's in huge debt, you're just forgiven. There you go. On the one hand, stuff ain't an issue. Here you go. On the other hand, though, the master, the king, in all of these examples, and indeed in the teachings of Christ across the board, is always also characterized by his shrewdness. And indeed, I think this is one of the really overlooked characteristics of the teachings of Jesus and the character of Jesus throughout the New Testament. He's shrewd and he advocates for shrewdness. At one point in Matthew 10:16, he even says, be shrewd as serpents and innocent as doves. This sounds bad because there's a snake in there. Snakes, generally things that we think of as being bad, they're usually bad in the Bible, but there's some kind of attribute of that serpent, a situational awareness, a cunning, a willingness to use the resources that are in front of you for maximum effect. There's something about that serpent that, if used in the service of innocence and rightness, because, innocent as doves, that it could not only be useful, but it would be useful, and you should do this. The expectation of the master in Matthew chapter 25 is that he's given one guy 5 talents, he's given one guy 2 talents, he's given one guy 1 talent, and the expectation is imitate my shrewdness and go make it happen. 2 of the 3 succeed in picking up on the nuance of what shrewdness is as a kingdom value, but 1 of the 3 doesn't get it. He is close, but he doesn't understand what shrewdness is, and maybe he didn't care to understand, and it's calamitous. So the 2 come back, of course, and they're like, here's your stuff. And the master's like, oh, yeah, roger that. That's great. Here's double what you had in the first place. You can handle that smaller amount. You'll be able to handle this bigger amount. Come share in my joy. And that's great. But then, of course, the third one, Matthew 25:24 is where I'm at. And he goes, Master, he said, I know that you are a hard man, harvesting where you've not sown and gathering where you haven't scattered seed. So I was afraid and went out and hid your talent in the ground. See, here's what belongs to you. And then the master calls him wicked, and the guy gets in trouble, and we'll break that down more later on. But the point is, the third guy mistook the noble shrewdness, cleverness, smartness, situational awareness, sense of urgency-ness of the master for just being petty thievery. He wasn't attentive enough to the little nuance and wrinkles of what the master was doing and what the master expected. And he mistook it for you just go cheat people or whatever. Like, let somebody else spend the money to plant a field. Then when they're not looking, just go grab it all out of there for yourself. That's shrewd, right? What? No, that's stealing. That's way different than shrewd. That's just straightforward theft. It's a violation against God. It's a violation against the livelihood, the work, the humanity of the person who you stole from. Ick. And this guy comes back and he's attributing those character traits to the master, and it does not go over well. But I want to round out this idea of what we learn about the character of the master before we land the plane here today. So the master has limitless provision, wildly generous, is willing to entrust people probably others wouldn't entrust. The master, as we discussed yesterday, would seem to be developing talent. He's not just investing in his own kingdom, but he's investing in his own kingdom, in his own household, by investing in people who don't yet even have the skill sets needed to really pay off or to really participate. So this is a master who has a long view and who is patient. Additionally, this master is shrewd, but this master is also just and merciful. So this master is a high character master and is eager to share even more of his abundance with those who understand the values of the household, but willing also in his righteous judgment to punish and even strip of privilege the person who rejects the character of the master and doesn't particularly want to take action in the service of the character of the master. And I think all of that fits with what we're seeing in the examples of the master in other parables of Jesus. And in light of the character of the master, I think the next thing that we need to consider in looking at this passage is how that character manifests as the rest of this story plays out, and if there are implications that go beyond just the immediate context here for even you and me or anybody who might want to be a part of kingdom stuff as we read it today. This master is a fascinating character. He's not like normal masters. He's got a little different agenda. He's coming to things in a little different way, and this is in keeping with that theme of an upside-down kingdom with a very different king who operates in ways and thinks in categories and has an agenda different from the kings and operators of this world who are thinking strictly in very temporal world kingdom categories. It's a fascinating contrast. We'll keep working on it here. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour Podcast. Let's do this again soon.